Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andi.
And I am Zach, and up next, pro marathoner Lindsay Flanagan discusses her PR marathon by effort, and in the world of running Diamond League, Oslo and Paris, and more. Remember that we are featuring listener questions next week on air. And so if you have not yet submitted a question, you want to try to catch an episode soon, submit one by going to AtoZrunning.com/questions. And when you do that, we'll feature you by your question and answer it on the episode.
Perhaps, yes. And we love connecting with you in a variety of ways. And this week we have a special treat. We have a video from listener George.
Good morning, Andi and Zach. This is George, checking in from England. I am at the Ipswich Park Run via suggestion of Zach that while in the UK to check out the park runs. I've never done one. I had a lovely run with Jack here, who took me through the course very smoothly. It's a rough one. He had a nice use of the downhills in the last mile there and got a nice gap. And I coasted it in for a second, knowing that I am just totally done from the work of the week and not sleeping much, but really great to do this while traveling. So thank you, Andi and Zach, for the suggestion to check out the park runs while in the UK.
Thanks for sharing, George. Park run is loads of fun. And, you know, when you can get into a new place and still find opportunities to connect with running and runners, just happens to be one of those things that people do everywhere.
Yes. And actually, specifically in the UK, Jarek, who helped us with our article about GPS running, you may be familiar with him from that. Anyway, he had recommended park runs too, specifically in the UK, that they have a vibrant scene for park run there. So thanks to Jarek.
Nice work.
Upcoming, we have Johnny's race in Michigan on June 24th. And I did want to mention, because a few of you had reached out after we posted about the flip belt, we do have a discount for that. And we love to make sure we share discount codes with you. And that's AtoZrunning 20, AtoZrunning 20. And the flip belt is a really great tool to use if you need to have things with you on the run, such as nutrition or bottles, or maybe you need your cell phone, like you need your wife to be able to get a hold of you. So it actually shows Zach putting his big
I don't
cell
think
phone
Andy's ever tried to get a hold of me while I was running.
I mean,
but
I have tried.
Maybe
I haven't
she's
been successful. Just kidding.
Andy, where does someone go to get that discount?
Yeah, you go to Flip Belt online. You'll be able to if you just search.
Type Flip Belt and you'll be there. Magically.
It's a product, and they have their own website, so you should be able to find Flip Belt. And when you check out, use code AtoZrunning20 for your discount. Now let's get on to the main topic.
Well, as previewed, we've got a podcast guest here today who's going to be talking about some really high-level performance stuff that happens to also have something to do with some of our recent content. And so we were talking not long ago about how to train by effort. And that's an episode that garnered quite a bit of attention as well as quite a bit of response, which we always appreciate, sharing your own experiences and thoughts with those things. Well, Andi pursued the topic further with pro marathoner Lindsay Flanagan and got some insights into her own experiences on that note.
And the reason we want to talk about this, not only is that something we want to be able to develop as intuitive running, but also because sometimes you don't have great feedback during a race. Sometimes you're not seeing the clock, your GPS is going wonky, maybe there's no pace group around you and you're running solo and you have to completely dial in and listen to your body. Well, you want to be prepared for that. And we love that Lindsay Flanagan is coming on the show today to discuss this in a very recent marathon PR in Paris. A little about our guest, Lindsay Flanagan. Lindsay is a pro runner and coach. She's been in the sport for 16 years and has continued to progress in the sport. She's posted several top 10 finishes at USATF championships, including runner-up at the 2021 15K championships. Lindsay is currently sponsored by ASICS and trains in Colorado. In Lindsay's most recent marathon, as mentioned, she ran a lifetime PR of, get this, 2:26:54, which we will discuss on today's show. So let's get to talking to Lindsay. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast. We are so glad to have you. How have you been since we met at the 25K championships?
Well, hello. Thank you for having me. And I have been good. I am gearing up for a summer marathon, which is a little bit different for me, but I'm doing good and I'm having fun with my training.
Yeah. So what one are you doing, if you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience?
I am running the Gold Coast Marathon on July 3rd, and it is in Australia. It'll be my first time over there. It is a very long travel, but I am really excited for it.
Yeah, that should be really exciting. And I've been doing some like research on you as I do. And I heard that your coach is from there. Can you tell us about this new coach that you have?
Yes, I'm coached by Benita Willis. She is fantastic. She lives over in Australia. And when she was competing, she lived in Boulder for a while. So we have that connection. That's where I live now. But she's incredible. She's run everything from like a 221 marathon. She's run, like 14 something in the 5K. Like she's so knowledgeable. And I had never, I knew that I knew about this race like, years ago. I heard there was a half marathon over there, but she's the one that was like, wow, you really need to get over here and do this marathon. It's a cool opportunity. So I really thank her for kind of planting the seed. And it's cool that we will finally meet in person just in a couple weeks. So,
Yeah, that's really exciting. So Zach's coach lives in New Zealand, Barry
mm.
McGee. And so if this race, if you recommend this course, maybe that would be an easy place for us to actually meet him. So we're going to have to like get your race review afterwards to see how you like that course, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it's very flat. I've heard it's fast. It starts at 6 a.m. So I think the weather tends to be like on the cooler side. So I will definitely send a report back after it is over.
Awesome. Thanks. So today we're going to talk about effort. We've been talking about it on the podcast for a little bit here. And I think it's so important for us to be able to be intuitive runners. And recently, congratulations, Paris Marathon, running a 2:26 so fast. You had to run by effort. And I know our audience would absolutely love to hear from you how that race went and how effort, that component, you had to dial that in.
Yeah, so I was lucky. I got to, run the Paris Marathon this year. Very cool. But so we started the race and I quickly realized there were no clocks on the course, at all. And I think that that's when you race in the US, like you always get your mile splits and things like that. But we're running along and I'm noticing, there's nothing out there. So I was like, all right, well, noted. I'm going to have to, just kind of listen to my body. And then also when you're running in a big city, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this in major marathons, your GPS watch does not work. And Paris was unique because a lot of it, you would kind of be running and we would go into these underground tunnels, which when that happens, there's no GPS. So it was one of those situations where I didn't know what pace I was running. I didn't have any clocks on the course. Like my watch was going crazy. And it was the first time I really, I do run by effort quite a lot, but this was the first time in a marathon I actually had to be like, wow, okay, does this feel like the effort that I'm going to be able to sustain for, 2+ hours? And it was a lot of, checking in with myself, seeing how I was feeling. Kind of, I feel like every 5K, which is where we kind of take our fluids, I would be like, okay, I got my bottle. Like, how am I feeling? You kind of do this, assessment. But that was very different for me because normally, I'm seeing the clots, I'm seeing the 5K splits, I'm seeing, my watch splits, and you kind of in your head I think sometimes it's not actually great. You're gauging your effort off that. You're like, oh, well, this is the pace I'm supposed to run, so I'm going to keep doing it. And I think sometimes, it's better actually to be like, oh, like I don't actually know the pace. I'm just doing exactly what my body needs. So I think that was really good. And Paris was also a pretty hilly course. So it was a lot of me being like, okay, I'm going uphill and I'm probably slowing down, but it's all about maintaining the effort. And then you get that back on the downhill. So I think on a hilly course too, and I'm sure a lot of people that ran Boston can relate to this. It's a lot of effort based running because you can't really run even splits on a course like that. It's a lot of like maintain on the up, kind of get it back on the down and just kind of, roll with it and see how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so exciting to hear you talk about it because there are so many variables and they can add interest and excitement to our race experience. But knowing how to run and feel the effort and be intuitive about what we can handle is so important. You said something about an assessment. What does that look like?
More like, okay, upper body, like, am I relaxed? Like, are my legs, like, do I feel okay? Like, am I running at like, a cadence that like feels normal to me? Or am I like really late? It's like my breathing labored? Are my legs really heavy? And like in a marathon, you're going to have, really good patches and bad patches. So I think we do a lot of self-assessment the whole time. But for me, like kind of having those 5K checkpoints to do it was big. And it's really, for me, it's a lot about like, kind of like checking in with the lower legs. Like, okay, like how are my quads, like hamstrings, especially on a hilly course where your quads are going to take a beating. I think I had to really think about that a lot and like how much energy I was exerting on the downhills. Like I love running downhill, and I pride myself in being a good downhill runner, but you can also get carried away on the downhills because like, oh, this is fun and I want to feel fast. So I kept being like, okay, like, do I feel like this is, am I surging? Because I don't really want to surge. I just need to kind of keep a level effort on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the head to toe assessment. The quads, that's definitely a good one. Do I need to preserve my quads? Am I already
Yes.
spending too much in that arena? That's really good. And is this something you also do in your training when you do your harder long efforts?
It is. Well, I actually train at altitude. So a lot of that is obviously I have paces that my coach gives me, but you have to be careful. Like if you go out too hard at altitude, like you very much suffer. I mean, that happens anywhere, but especially when it's hot out and you're at altitude. So a lot of it is I find that a lot of times I need to ease into it. So maybe the first like couple miles of a long tempo are like not even close to like that goal pace. But I find by like listening to my body and not like out the gate trying to hit that pace, I actually close way better and, average the same time I'm supposed to. But for me, like, I think it's better, like, not to freak out when you see your watch that you might be starting a little bit slower, because I think back to my most successful races and I've always had a more conservative start and have been able to pick it up. And it's way more fun when you're in that position in a marathon, being the one that's catching people as opposed to people catching you. So I've learned a lot that it doesn't have to be this perfect pace right out the gate, like better to listen to your body, ease into it. And then again, you'll always run faster later on if you've done that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, specifically going back to the race, how did you in the race when obviously you've been doing this a long time, 16 years of competitive running, but when you're in the race and from what I heard, you didn't have people around you to help keep the energy and you're pressing this effort, a race effort, in fact, a PR effort. How did you keep the press? How did you keep the effort what it needed to be?
Yeah, I think, well, for me, I do end up doing, a lot of longer workouts by myself. And I think a lot of people do that. Like you're out there early, like, everyone has different time constraints. So I just kind of kept telling myself, like, you do this all the time. Like it's not glamorous. You don't have like a cheer squad out there normally. So if you could do that, at practice, like you can do it here. So I kind of reminded myself of that. And Paris is a great marathon. I didn't know ahead of time, but it's huge. I mean, it's comparable to like a New York City. So I think just like taking in the energy of the crowds and you're just like, okay, I'm going to just use that to fuel this effort is kind of what I did. And you get really good at like little mental tricks and be like, oh, they're cheering just for me. Like, this is so exciting. So I think as like cheesy as that is, you kind of have to use everything when you're out there.
Yeah. True confession, I've actually pretended that people were saying my name instead of other people's name before. So this is true confession. I just will pretend that they're there to cheer for me.
Exactly. Especially in a race where like you don't actually know anybody. You're like, I'm going to tell myself whatever I need to get me through this. So,
Uh-huh. Yep. Got to do that. And I think it's great too, to be able to have that self-talk be positive. Obviously, you have a lot of self-talk when you're there alone for many, many miles.
we had like a very small little group for a couple of miles, but then very quickly, like the pace was too fast. So about mile 8, I started running by myself. And then I realized when I wasn't seeing anybody, just how long of a race I had to go by myself. And the thought of like, oh my gosh, I think I'm gonna have to do, 18 miles by myself. So I could have freaked out, or I could have just been like, all right, we're gonna roll with it. And so it was one of those days where you just had to be positive and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna roll with it. And hopefully those people that went out really hard, I'm gonna be the one catching them and gaining momentum, which is what ended up happening, which was really cool. So I'm glad that I didn't freak out when at mile 8 it started to get really hard, because that's very early on to be feeling kind of that way.
Mm-hmm. So you had to make a hard decision in that race. Did you
Yes.
go through that scenario? Like that decision, that was hard. So how did you make that decision?
Yeah, I think ahead of time I had, they went through pacers ahead of, the day before the race. And, the main pacer was going to go out. I think if they went out in maybe 68 or 69. And I knew that that's too fast. That's like what I run my flat out half marathon in. So I knew that going in, like talking to my coach, there was a strong possibility I would be running alone, because a lot of people probably were going to go at that pace. So I think kind of before the race, if you kind of give yourself a couple different scenarios that might play out, you don't really freak out as much, because you're like, okay, I kind of thought this might happen. So now I just need to, stay within myself and run my own race at this point.
Mm-hmm. And you were able to do that because you knew that effort was too hard when you were running the 8 with those ladies, and to make that decision, to know that was a possibility, and then to simmer it down and then end up running a PR marathon was a really intelligent way to run, but also because you know yourself well enough, you've found what effort is appropriate for you for the marathon distance. So let's talk a little bit about that. So you're in a race. Let's say it's a championship race. You're not really running. You're running for a position. So sometimes the efforts will vary to stay in the race. How do you approach a championship race and monitoring your effort and what you're capable of?
Yeah, so a championship race it's always a little different, because you're not trying to run this even pace. Like there's going to be surges, and we saw that in Boston this year, where the ladies, I think it was very early on, dropped like a 5-minute mile, and a lot of people assessed the effort and said like, wow, that's too hard, I need to scale it back a little bit. But I think that in a championship you do have to be smart, though, because like I said, if you're running at mile 5 is a 5-minute mile, that's, for me at least, and a lot of people, that's way too fast for a middle of a marathon. So I think in those instances, you do also have to have confidence in your training, being like, okay, if I dial it back a little bit now, like I know that I have the legs to pick it up later on. So it makes it harder in those situations, because you want to be competitive. But we kind of saw the ladies in Boston that kind of toned it back, ended up finishing very, very well. So that was just like a great example of being like, okay, assess that effort. That's not marathon pace. And then scaling it back, you ended up having a really great day later on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the scenario of holding back holding back because that the effort might be too strong for that point in the race. It's not sustainable. Let's talk about the other way, where you're running a race and feedback is telling you that your effort should be higher than it actually is, and it's a great day. Is there a time where you're like, I'm not afraid of this, I'm going to just like go for it? How do you gauge a good day and challenging limits that you haven't been at before?
Yeah, I mean, I think when like your legs are feeling good, and you've like, maybe you get through the first couple miles of race, maybe it's even a half marathon, and you're like, okay, I feel good. Like this is the day that I'm gonna, really push it. I think that you do have to capitalize on those days, because they don't happen that often. Like I can count on like one hand the magical races I've had where you feel amazing. So I think when that does happen, you're like, okay, this is a good day, I gotta roll with it. So instead of like immediately sprinting away, I think you just kind of gradually start picking up the pace. And like I said, the races that I've kind of started a little slower, I've been able to close super well. And those are the days you feel good too. So I think, yeah, like gradually picking it up, like you got to roll with it those days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And be unafraid, to be able to be intuitive enough with ourselves to know this is within my wheelhouse. I am confident that I can do this because I have built my fitness and I know what this effort is to me and how long I can sustain it. Yeah, those are some really good points there. Now, how about training? And there's this conversation always about easy runs, and I know it might be overspoken about, but I think it's such an imperative conversation. And I had listened to a podcast that you were on, and I heard you say, like, sometimes you just got to leave your watch behind or don't look at it, make it be like the time of day instead. Can you talk us through why it's important to have good recovery? And I know you talk to your athletes about this too. So would you mind sharing with the audience?
Yes, of course. So I think that I learned the hard way. I think back in college, and like every day I thought that I needed to put in like this really great effort if I wanted to be, a really good runner. So, you go out, like it was the era where we first all got our first GPS watches, and you would obsess over, you're like, oh my gosh, if I'm not running like sub 7-minute pace on an easy run, like it doesn't even count. And I actually just learned that really didn't make me faster. I was never absorbing my workouts because I was always just kind of riding this, line of, I felt like I just needed to have this like really good effort every single day. So I ended up always just like really frustrated with the races because I never felt like they were going, the way that my training was. So I think it was once I graduated and, started to, learn more and mature, I realized that running slower wasn't actually making me slower. And right after I graduated, I trained with a lot of Ethiopian athletes, and they really taught me that, we would go for these jogs in the afternoon, and sometimes it was like 10-minute miles. And these are women that are just incredible athletes. And I was like, wow, like if they're taking their recovery this seriously, obviously I need to too. So that was just like this huge learning experience where I'm like, wow, like if I just slow it down on those days, like my hard sessions are going to be so much better quality, and my races are going to be even better too. So I'm really lucky that I learned that like really early on, like early 20s. And that's something that to this day, I still do. Like if it's a recovery run, like my athletes ask me all the time, like, should I try and hit a certain pace? And I'm like, absolutely not. Like you should just run by feel. Like the main thing is like, you want to feel like you're holding it. You could talk to somebody the entire time. And if you're out there and you feel like you're not, or you're going into tempo effort, like that's a no-go. So I think, like scaling the effort back, like not looking at the watch, not trying to get the Strava crown on the easy run, I think is a huge one. I get athletes all the time. They're like, but I wanted the crown today. I was like, no, today was not a crown day. Like, let's just maybe try that on like the workout day. So yeah. And I think when you're, in marathon training, or if you're running high mileage, like you just realize like you can't, sprint every day. You've got to have those recovery days. And like I said, the workouts are so much better quality when you do that. And the workouts are really what help you run, well. So I think if you prioritize that, then you'll be, good to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have the same philosophy too, that I heard you speak on another podcast about, and that's that, growing that volume, it's only going to be able to happen if you're able to slow down, because a lot of people are running their maximum capacity, and not being able to recover. So then they feel bad all the time. And so they're not able to grow their volume, which in turn will help grow their aerobic fitness. And then they'll be able to see some great gains. And it's just hard sometimes to wrap the mind around it. And so it's super valuable for us to hear from a professional runner like you that says it's okay to run easy and slow on your easy or recovery days, because there's a purpose to it. And I think it's extremely valuable to hear from you. So you talked us through a little bit of what that journey was like for you as being such a successful road runner. When you go into races, do you talk through what the effort is going to feel like, or what it could feel like depending on variables? So like, let's say, a course like the Olympic trials was super hilly and windy that day. Do you talk through what the effort will feel like at different stages?
Yeah, I think you do. I think that like obviously for me, like you just have to be, if you're in a race like that, it's like just more so like that first 10K, you just want to make sure you don't gas yourself, especially on like a hilly, windy day. So I think kind of like assessing before and being like, okay, so how do I need to feel like during this stage? Like maybe I don't feel great, but like, do I feel like I have, the legs to, carry on? So I think especially on like days that are like very hot, which is something I struggle with are very windy. You have to like kind of decide ahead of time. And also during the race, like, okay, how am I feeling? Is this something that I'm going to be able to sustain? And I think if you take like that approach, and really try and assess how you're feeling that first 10K, you'll probably have a good later stage of the race. Cause we've all had marathons where the last 10K was just really ugly. And it's way better to not have that experience. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm going to bring it full circle with Paris again. And I know you've had so many good races, but it's super recent, so I was really impressed by it. So that's another reason. And I want to hear personally what you were going through. How was the final stages? Cause I know you said the first 8 miles were fast. And then what was the rest of the race like for you?
So I would say the last 10K was definitely the hardest. And a lot of that was because it was the hilliest part of the course, but it was also on cobblestone. So that like when your legs are already that tired, and you're running over like very uneven terrain, it just makes it a little bit harder. So I think the whole time, like there's a couple times I almost like laughed because I was like, oh my gosh, this is just like so difficult. And I didn't know it was going to be like this. So yeah, I would say that last 10K was really hard, but during that kind of phase, I think during the last 2 miles, I passed like maybe even like 4 people. So it was fun to be the person passing each other because I could see like how many people were like the course and everything, and the hot pace like took a toll on people. So last 10K was incredibly difficult, physically, but mentally it was kind of fun because you're like, oh, I'm gaining momentum. Like I'm not speeding up, but I am passing people. So you feel kind of that like jolt of excitement. So I think that kind of helped carry me on. And I didn't even know what place I was at that point, but I was like, okay, every person matters in a race like this. So you just kind of keep chipping away. And then finally we make like the final turn on the cobblestone road. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I see a 26 on the clock. And then I was like, oh, I really do. And so that was kind of a fun moment.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any idea that you were running that fast?
No, I didn't. I thought it was much slower. I was like, oh, based on how this is, like, I'm not really sure what this clock is going to show. And then, I could see it in the distance, and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that is a 26. That's not a 28. And then I was really excited because I was like, oh, like that was a very hard race, and to run a PR, I was very, very happy with that.
Yeah. And how much of a PR? What was your PR before Paris?
My PR before was from Chicago 2019. I ran like 2:28, maybe 12. So it was a minute and 15 seconds or so, which I will take. I mean, in a marathon, I'll even take 2 seconds. Like you want anything at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And how long have you been marathoning?
I think I ran my first marathon in 2015, in Houston, actually. So it's been 7 years of marathons. And I think that might have been number 12. So I have done quite a few.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really neat to be such a long time runner and get such a big PR. That is big, especially when you get down to those fast of times. It's really big. So congratulations on that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
it was exciting. And yeah, I mean, I ran Chicago in the fall. It was very hot. So didn't have a great day there. So I was like, oh, I just needed like a little bit of like a redemptive race at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And first American in the entire race. That's so exciting. And then what were you overall? You were in the top overall too. What was it?
Yeah, I was 10th. So
10th.
to be
Okay.
it was, it was a super stacked race. I think I was ranked like 20th going in. So to finish 10th, I was pretty happy with that.
So Lindsay, did you expect to run such a strong race without any feedback from clocks?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was a surprise. I've never, run a race like that. Like even in a championship race, like you're still getting clocks or feedback, or there's even people around you that you can kind of gauge off of. So no, I think that I didn't really expect that, but it gave me a lot of confidence kind of going forward when I do have maybe a few more variables out there and a few more, feedback mechanisms that maybe I'll feel even better, or maybe that's just the way I should race. Just kind of always just be listening to my body and not obsessing over those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, it did turn out great for you. And as I think of like all the things that could go wrong, for instance, like in Chicago, a lot of people run Chicago, so that's a good frame of reference, that the GPS does not work in Chicago. And sometimes you do get disconnected from whatever pace group you are in, or you're just not seeing the clock for some reason. Maybe you're like in the thick of it and you just don't see it. And to be able to dial into that effort, I think is so important and so keen when we're talking about intuition and getting the most out of ourselves. When you're processing this race, what things stand out to you about how it went? And were there any moments that you were questioning or that you had a hard time staying engaged?
Yeah, I do think that like after halfway was when we kind of were, you would start going through those underground tunnels. And for me, when I'm running in the dark, I feel like I'm running very fast, but I'm actually not. So I think I realized when I'm going to these tunnels, I was like, oh no, I'm like slowing down like quite a bit every time we go into one of these because I just didn't have a lot of, perception of what was going on. So I do think that I look at kind of that second half of the race, and I do think there are a lot of things I could have, improved upon, or maybe could have tried to stay more engaged during that, because also when you're going into these tunnels, you don't even have the crowds at that point because you're, underground. So I did struggle. I think it was from like, 30 to 35K. I think I had a pretty rough patch, but processing it, I think that that's definitely where I could have improved, but I also don't know how much, if I could have really done anything different, in a situation like that.
I think that being able to go through and have the mental strength, you had mentioned a couple things. I know this isn't exactly on topic, but you had mentioned a couple things in preparation. One, you do some workouts alone and have to focus. How do you cultivate that focus in your training besides running alone?
Yeah. I mean, I also just think like, as runners, we all like really dialed into like, the workout and things like that. But yeah, for me, it's, I'm pretty focused. Like I listen to like a lot of podcasts and music when I'm running, but on a workout day, like absolutely not. Like I'm always just like listening to my breathing, listening to things like that. So I think I've taught myself to focus that way, where I know, I mean, listening to music and stuff is great for a lot of people when they're working out, but for me it doesn't work because I did it like once and it didn't go well. So I'm like, I'm someone who like has to focus on like, the task at hand. So I think that's how I do it, where it's, you wish you kind of had a distraction, but you force yourself not to be distracted. And it may not be the most fun way to do a workout, but I really do think it is, beneficial.
We talked to Mario Mendoza. He's an ultra guy. He had the world record on the treadmill and stuff. And we talked about having there be times where you have to hone in on your focus because we have to grow that as distance runners. And if we're listening to stuff and we're like distracted, so to speak, then it's kind of hard to listen to our bodies on those harder effort days. Easy days doesn't really matter quite as much, but when we're trying to focus, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think that's something that could be a takeaway for a lot of people who want to level up in their running, to have more intentional, more focused, more intuitive runs where we're really focusing on how we're feeling, how our form is. You talked about having tension. I think you said something about having tension in your upper body. Like, am I holding tension in these places? How are these things going? Is there anything else that's part of that checklist for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and then also you're always kind of checking in. Like I said, I feel like this is just the marathon of me, like, how are my legs feeling? But also not like obsessing over that, because that, when you first start, you're not going to, for at least for me, like, I don't feel that great for a first couple, reps or miles. And you always kind of start getting better later on. So kind of assessing how you feel in the beginning, the legs, but just like also having like the confidence to know that like that, you'll find this rhythm as you kind of keep going.
Do you hold tension anywhere? Like, do you ever notice, I guess for me, like when I am going into a high stakes situation, or what I perceive as high stakes situation, my body tends to tense up more and things might feel harder than they should, or my breathing isn't as regular as it normally would be because it's high stakes. Do you struggle with any of that? And if you do, how do you work through it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like my upper back and my shoulders, to the point where like after a marathon, the thing that's sometimes is so sore is my arms. And I'm like, that should not be the case. Like my arms should not be sore from like the marathon. But I think like when you're caught, when like you actually are like, okay, lower your shoulders away from your ears and just like relax your arms. It's just something so simple. But if I like remind myself that, I'm like, oh, okay, I immediately feel a lot better. Like, no, my breathing feels more natural. Like I'm not, super tense and tight. So for me, yeah, it's always the upper body. And I think I learned that when I was having like very sore arms and shoulders after the marathon.
Yeah, that's the thing that probably you wouldn't expect to be sore.
No. You're like, it should be the legs. And of course the legs are sore. You're like, I really don't know why my arms are, so sore. So
that's great. So Lindsay, as we wrap up this conversation, what would you like to encourage the listeners with when it comes to being intuitive and listening to your body?
Don't be discouraged if, right away, like you're running and you're like, oh my gosh, this feels, way harder and I'm not even on pace. Like you need to ease into those types of races. People that are in mass starts, like you're standing for maybe an hour before you even take off. So you might not feel great at first, but I think like just being calm and knowing that, okay, just ride this out for a little bit and having the confidence to know like you've done the training and that as you get into things, like it's going to come along. So just listen to your body and don't, gas yourself that first 10K, like focus on having a really great final 10K and you'll be so much happier that you did that. And really like the momentum you get from like picking up the pace and passing people, like it's such a fun feeling and everyone should experience that. So I think if you listen to yourself early on, like you'll have that kind of happen in the end.
Mm-hmm. And it's exciting and it's fun. And that momentum, like you were mentioning, that momentum, it builds better if you're able to roll it out slowly and get going. So that's a really good piece of advice. Thank you, Lindsay. I'm sure that all of our listeners want to hear. So what's next after your marathon in Australia? Do you have anything on the calendar?
I do. Well, I'm going to take a really nice break. I'm going to stay in Australia for a week after, do a little bit of traveling. And then my sister's running the Wine and Shine half in Napa. So I'm going to go as a spectator and we're going to have a fun weekend down there. And then I am going to be changing gears and gearing up for a fall marathon. So I'm excited for that too.
Yes. Awesome. Well, we'll keep our audience up to date. We always do. They've heard your name multiple times in the show because you're always, one of the top finishers at road racing circuit. So we've appreciated your time today here, Lindsay, and thank you so much.
Yes. Thanks for having me. And it was great to catch up. It's been a while.
So today, I hope we answered the question, can you run great times and have great races without feedback? And the answer is yes, because you're getting internal feedback and you're developing that on the run. I also really appreciated what Lindsay said about recovery days. Running slow doesn't make you slow. She said that, and I really appreciated that because we have to talk about how we can run easy, let go of the watch in those instances, especially, and just run what we need to run for the day. And running slow on recovery days, running slower than you think you should for easy days, doesn't mean that you're slow.
Also running slow during like building phases. And there's certain times that it is important to run slow. Mm-hmm. Contrary to what Emil Zatopek was most famous for saying, where he basically said, the famous quote, why run slow? Why train slow when you're trying to race fast, or essentially like that? The quote has something to do with training fast.
We've discussed a lot about why that is the case. And we love that Lindsay, who runs at the top of U.S. female distance running. In fact, she is in these marathons like Paris, where she places so well. I think she was 9th in that race and then first American. She places globally and she is able to give herself what her body needs and her training needs. And then, of course, all of this helps develop that intuition as a runner. So thank you, Lindsay, for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, with that, let's get on to the world of running. First up in the world of running, let's give a few A to Z runner shout outs for some performances over the weekend. At the LPGA 5K, Jacob and Kelly both ran, and in strong performances, Jacob would have been a PR if it
was a little
was
short,
totally accurate course. And Kelly won her age group.
Yeah, and ran a really strong 5K too.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Then over in the Light Point 5K, Mark also won his age group which was an
Congrats,
excellent
Mark.
result. And thanks, Andrew, for putting that on. And then Lewis paced the Charlevoix Marathon, had a good showing there. And Chad competed in the Tahoe 200.
Whew.
200
Like as in 200
miles
miles.
of 50,000 feet of climbing in the mountains.
Amazing.
Incredible. Nice work, everyone.
Yeah. Now let's talk about some World of Running news. We have Bislett in Oslo, the Diamond League Championships.
Not the championships, just the Diamond League.
Diamond League. I'm sorry. Yeah, part of the Diamond League series.
It's one of the big ones.
One of
yeah.
the big ones. Now, the conditions didn't seem to be conducive for running fast times. It was rainy. In fact, during the 5,000, which we're going to talk about because it was astounding, it
kinda
was
fun to watch
downpouring during part of that.
Pouring
Yeah.
rain.
But it was 60s and there wasn't much wind. So it was kind of like it could have been too hot. You know, there's lots of variables.
You could also
But-
tell by watching the women who is more just used to running in the rain by their faces. So like their faces were like scrunched,
Yeah.
like super tense, and just constantly wiping their face, getting the water out of their eyes, which of course you definitely need to do because otherwise they're literally just getting water in their eyes. But then you saw some, like Grovdal from Norway, who just looked chill and relaxed. Like the rain didn't phase her at all.
We'll talk about it. Let's actually talk through these athletes.
Let's do it.
Because there were some tremendous performances. Dawit Sayum of Ethiopia won the event in 14:25.84.
In the pouring rain. That might be a pouring rain world record.
It might be. So she's moved up in distance. She's been known as a middle distance specialist. And her global medals actually have been all in 1,500 meter runs. So it's no surprise, though, that in the final stages of this race, she would have had the closing speed. So all she had to do was really hang on and race well. And then she had such great closing speed. And then second was multiple time medalist Godaf Tsegay of Ethiopia. And she was one who had the kind of angry look a little bit.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
angry. I mean, I would look that way too.
Just tense.
You just
Just tense
furrow
from
your
the
brows
rain,
and
yeah.
everything. Tense from the rain. That's a good way to put it. She ran 14:26.69. And third was Letezabet Gidey, also of Ethiopia. So the top three were from Ethiopia. She ran 14:26.92. She's, of course, on the World of Running all the time. She's both the 5,000 and 10,000 meter record holders. And she also on the road has the half marathon and 15K world records.
Yeah, and now this is interesting. So you've been seeing the Ethiopians doing a lot of head-to-head-to-head racing lately, and that's because the Ethiopian national team is decided not by a single event, although in the 10,000 it's kind of by a single event, but really, ultimately, it's about how well they perform against each other throughout the season. So this is why you see Gidey and Godaf Tsegay have been racing each other actually quite a bit at these Diamond Leagues, and it's because they need to get in as many strong performances as they can to be selected for the team.
Yeah. And it produces some really exciting
fast
races.
times. Yeah,
some fast
yeah.
times. And the exciting thing is that there were more personal bests within this race, and those were not personal bests, except for our first place finisher. I believe that one was but I'm not sure, so I'll fact check that.
Double check that.
Yep. So Caroline Bijakeli
Grovdal
led the race once the rabbit dropped. And like Zach said, she was very composed. Now, she didn't win, but she did earn herself a 12-second personal best of 14:31. She's 32 years old, and she broke her country's record.
National record for
national
Norway.
record. Ingrid Christensen's, and that had been a 36-year-old record.
Incredible performance. And more to it, she would have won that race if she had the kind of finishing speed that these other women had.
Yeah.
She just couldn't hack it when it came down to the final sprint stuff.
And
but
she finished in a battle with our podcast guest and one we love to follow, Alicia Munson of the USA, part of the On Athletics Club, coached by Dathan Ritzenhein. Now, Alicia ran 14:31.11 and climbed to number 3 on the all-time U.S. list.
wow. And
Yes.
a big PR for her as
Huge
well.
PR. Previous PR was 14:42. So
Nice.
that was very impressive. And of course, she did really well in this super stacked race. In fact, she beat former 10,000 world record holder Almaziana.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Ayana was in there from Ethiopia.
Yeah. So super strong running from Munson. She was within striking distance and she was strong the whole time. So it was really cool to see her getting her nose in that competition of such strong women. And I did want to give you a little update. This week is USA's and she won't be running the 5,000 even though she has the third fastest time in US history because she has also been chosen for the 10,000 as you remember from
Already
the
made the
10,000
team,
championships. So she is going to be focusing, dialing in on becoming super competitive for the world stage when it comes to worlds later on this summer. So she's made that choice to hopefully give us all a thrill at the world championships later on. I did want to mention who she's in leagues with now because we always like to bring back the runners who many of you know the names of. Number 1 on the U.S. all-time list is Shelby Houlihan, 14:23.92. And then Carissa Schweitzer of the USA, well, these are all US, 14:26.34. And then it's Alicia.
The two of them did that in a time trial event that was like only their team.
Yeah, but it was during COVID. It was July 10th of 2020.
Yeah, so if you recall, everyone was talking about that as like they basically just set up the best possible scenario for running as fast as they could in times. And so for Munson to do this in a race environment, which was not ideal conditions, like that speaks volumes about what she just did performance-wise.
Right.
Because otherwise, the next best time is an indoor, which is, indoor is controlled conditions, which many talk about indoor as being potentially faster than outdoor in terms of just the track.
And that's Elise Cranny.
And then after that is Shannon Rowbury.
Right.
Which, so like she put on 7 seconds on Shannon Rowbury's time, which was an incredible performance itself as well.
She's a legendary runner. And I do kind of want to say, like, Alicia Munson's in the mix with these Bowerman track people. And I just want to make sure that we recognize how amazing the OAC is. I know we mentioned it a few times on this podcast, but they are ones to watch and super, super cool that we've had Dathan on the show a couple of times talking about his strategies as a coach and a performer himself.
Indeed. Well, let's talk about the men's mile, which was also an exciting race.
Yeah, it was called the Dream Mile.
Well, I mean, you got to give it some kind of fancy name so people will run fast. So Jakob Ingebrigtsen was once again in top form, showing the world that he's the guy to beat. And we always enjoy seeing how that kind of a race unfolds. And they were talking, I found it interesting as they were discussing during the race what kind of race he likes to run. I did not at all agree with them as they were talking about it. So they were like, Jakob Ingebrigtsen likes to run a middle race kind of race where he's powering hard through the middle. And when he's doing like fast time trial performance type of stuff, that's true. That is the way he likes to race. But when it comes to championship stuff, he never controls the race. He always hangs out in the lead and then waits until someone starts making moves and then he just punishes them for their moves. So like I'm listening to the announcers and I'm like, okay, so there's 2 different types of races here. When you want to just run a fast time or when you want to just win a race, and he can do all of it. He just does whatever it takes.
And also when he has like recently been way out in front, it's like, okay,
just
it sounds like he's hammering the middle, but that he has another gear at the end most likely that he's not using because he's not being challenged. So even though he hammers the middle, I believe that he has that closing speed, as we've seen on multiple occasions. It's been proven time and time again.
So they said.
So yeah. So they said. What
they said it was the fastest mile time in the last 21 years.
Yes.
Just amazing.
Now, he didn't hit his goal, however. I don't know if he had announced his goal or people are just kind of speculating on his goals, but he was shy of breaking Steve Cram's European mile record of 3:46.32.
So he ran 3:46.46.
So just shy.
1400ths or something like that. And if I'm not mistaken, Steve Cram himself was announcing the race.
Cool.
So I know he does announce a lot of races. I'm pretty sure he was on there because they were asking him about things. One of the funny things as they were talking about is the way Steve Cram ran that record was a very different kind of race than the way Ingebrigtsen ran his time here. And so it's just kind of the comparison was interesting to me. So watch it. You can find it for free.
We're going to post it on AtoZrunning.com.
It is also the first time since Alan Webb in 2007 ran 3:46.9. The first time someone's gone under 3:47 in a full mile.
Yeah.
Which we mentioned in the last 21 years, the fastest time. That's really these are incredible things.
And also you can just realize how amazing Alan Webb is.
Yeah,
Let's
right.
just take
that
a moment
race
to
was
realize
just so good.
Our American record holder is pretty amazing, super legit. faster than Jakob Ingebrigtsen.
So who else was around in the race? Because it sounds like we're just talking about Ingebrigtsen, but he was not alone.
No, and might
was not doing that
part
solo.
of the reason, actually, I'm sure, part of the reason he was able to achieve what he did in this race is because he was challenged vigorously by none other than our previous podcast guest, Oliver Hoare, also of the OAC, coached by Dathan Ritzenhein.
So you had Aussie Ali Hoare
Yes.
as well as Brit Jake Whiteman in the mix, really throwing down some aggressive racing, which was just so much fun to see.
Couldn't shake those speedy guys.
Yep.
And Oliver clocked a time of 3:47.48 to take almost a second off of Stuart McSwaney's Australian record.
And not just an Australian record, an Oceania area record at that.
Yes. And then Whiteman ran a Scottish outdoor record of 3:50.30.
Excellent.
So-
And I apologize. I did call him a Brit. Really, truly, he is a Scot and part of Great Britain. But
dare
anyway,
you.
yes. So yeah, Whiteman's record, impressive for the Scottish record. You just don't see races like this fast and people just challenging this often lately. And so it's really exciting to see something like that. That fast of a race where you have multiple people pushing and going for these fast times.
And as you remember from a few weeks ago, there was that really funny interview with Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who was like, "Oh, their guys aren't just they're not showing up. They're not challenging me." Well, he got a challenge this week, and it was super fun to see. And I know he won't be alone at the World Championship.
I really would love to. I'd love to hear Whiteman and Hoare, for instance, react to watch that interview. I'm sure that they know about it because everyone was talking about it. But watch that interview and just react to it.
Yeah.
What would you say back to Ingebrigtsen right there?
You got to have confidence in this industry, but it is really fun when we can see a really strong field of runners really getting after it and having a great race. Now, that wasn't the only Diamond League run.
2 days later in Paris, and this is, by the way the Diamond League works. These things, because a lot of the races are in Europe and they're not terribly far apart geographically, so you'll see some races like one on a Tuesday, one on a Friday, or one on a Thursday, one on a Saturday, 2 different major meets. They also don't run the same focus events at each Diamond League meet. And I know we've explained this in the past, but for those who are tuning in and haven't heard us talk about Diamond League terribly much, the focus events are different. So like you have one meet where the men run the 1500 and or the 5000. In this case, it was the mile and the 5000. And then you'll have another meet where they run the 800 and the 3000 steeplechase. So like they don't do the same races at every meet. As a consequence, you kind of see things able to be closer together, but runners are spread out more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in this instance,
we
women's
had some
steeple
fun racing. Winfred Yavi soloed by herself, running super strong, an 8:56 steeple. She moves to the 4th all-time in the entire world.
Number 4 all-time. And she runs for, who does she run for? Burundi?
Please.
We'll have to double check
I didn't write
that.
that in there. My apologies.
It's not written in there.
Zach,
I
stop
can
guessing.
tell you what the flag looks like. It's got red with zigzags and vertical zigzags
You
and
should
white.
just look
Anyway,
it up if you're
all
gonna
right.
keep
So
going about it.
Andy's like, stop talking. The point being, she ran a very fast time, and she really did have to do that basically solo. Now, Yavi is not unfamiliar with running fast times in the steeplechase. She's been a threat for years now. But this in particular was impressive because she had to kind of just do it alone, and they kept talking about how hot it was.
Yeah.
Like they just kept saying, it's very hot. I don't know if she can hang on. I don't know if she can hold it. And she did. So that was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
The men's 800 was also exciting.
It was so exciting. Like amazing
That
times.
finish was so cool.
It was so thick of talent in the very end. In the end stretches, you didn't know who was going to win, which made it so exciting. And
Especially
it had
'cause
a
the
really
one-
unusual winning finish, which we're going to talk about. But first off, let's just talk about how quick this race was. It was won in 1:43.75.
New world leading time.
New world leading time, Benjamin Robert. And
Of France.
Of France. And the fun thing about this is that he was tearing down, there's a huge group of them, and he goes in between 2 guys to
Thread the needle.
threaded the needle, few elbows going up, but he
It
was
was
tearing
cool.
through. He literally tore through the 2 of
So
the other ones
you have
that
to
were there.
imagine this for a moment, because you're coming down in the 800, the last 100 meters is just like carnage. Everyone's just dying and falling over and trying to make it to the line before they do. And so in you get to the last 100, and it's like whoever can hold on the most tends to win in an 800. Well, he suddenly decides to accelerate when everyone else is collapsing, basically. And he was not very far up yet. So he gets to 100 meters to go, and he starts tearing through, but he's like in the middle of everybody. He's not on the outside. He's not on the inside. He's right in the
spot.
middle. So he just starts gunning past people where they're slowly spreading out to try to like get around others. They're creating space for him, except for the first two guys who are side by side.
They don't want you to beat them.
Yeah, well, they're running side by side, racing each other, and along comes Robert, who at one point, one of the guy's arms comes back, and he just knocks the guy's arm out of his way, like just bashes his arm, and then runs right between them.
But there was enough space for him to get through. So if those two guys would have been a little closer together, he wouldn't have been able to do it.
And he wouldn't have won the race.
But there was enough room for his body to get through, but not his arms.
He turned sideways. He had to do like a sideways turn to get between them, and he's running at breakneck speed. It was awesome.
His face was cool and collected,
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to mention with the 5,000, Alicia Munson, who we talked to about her racing and everything, and being calm and thinking of any situation that could possibly happen. She was super calm in the race. So
her face
was calm. Her legs were spinning like a mad woman, running
what was
super
going
fast
on inside her head.
Exactly, but she was very cool and collected. It seems to be that a lot of the champions are able to relax their face.
So back to the 800 meters, because Peter Bull of Australia also in second place ran a new Oceania record of 144 flat 0-0, which was very impressive.
And I said there was a ton of people there. 7 men finished within the same second.
Yeah.
5
love it.
personal bests.
And then 1 area record, Australian and Oceania record. Yeah. So good.
Exciting times.
That was a fun one. Well, let's change gears a little bit here and talk about some ultra marathoning for a moment. We wanted to mention a few past guests have been running some crazy stuff in the ultra world.
Yeah, very impressive. At the Broken Arrow Sky Race, Mario Mendoza won, which then allowed him to win the Triple Crown.
Which is a thing.
He won the triple
That's
crown. He earned the Triple Crown.
I don't know how you fit all 3 on your head at the same time, but he's going to
But if you're an ultra guy who can run like that, then you'll find a way to do it. So congrats to Mario Mendoza. That was on Father's Day, which is super cool because he is a father ×2 now. So congratulations to Mario on that. And then Brittany Charbonneau, the funny runner, was runner-up at the Broken Arrow Sky Race 52K.
What a funny runner. It's just kind of funny because like without context, if people don't know who Brittany is, they're probably thinking, why is Andy
calling
mocking
her
like that?
No, that's her thing. She's a comedian and she's a runner. She was a runner-up, and that qualified her. I don't know exactly how the standards work, but either this race or a series of races that allowed for her in rankings.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how that is. She qualified for the World Championships to represent Team USA. So congrats.
The World Ultra Championships.
Yep.
What's the exact distance
I think
of
it's
that?
in Thailand.
We'll have to fill you in on more.
Yes, we will.
As that unfolds,
absolutely. And most recent podcast guest, Dakota Lindworm, defended her title at the Grandma's Marathon, and she ran a personal best time of 2:25:01.
Solid.
And
that is fast, and Grandma's does not usually run that fast.
Yeah, it was really fast.
It's really good.
Yeah, and she had mentioned in the podcast how she will smile. I kind of had a theme through a lot of this. She smiles during her race. We talked about a little bit about composure. I'm trying to thread this through. But she had said in her podcast interview with us, which I'll link to, about how she will smile during the race. And we talked about a winning mindset and taking your thoughts captive and turning your negative to positive to look at some challenges as opportunities. And so she did at the Grandma's Marathon as a testament to her advice with us.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. That's very exciting stuff. Yeah. Well, speaking of turning challenges into opportunities, you probably have questions that have to do with training and running. And we could have answers. I mean, we'll have answers, just whether or not they're good ones or helpful ones. You're going to have to decide that. What? Okay. So you get mad at me when I'm too arrogant? You get mad at me when I'm self-effacing? What's the deal here? So anyway, we do, in fact, want to answer your questions. Is more than anything, we want to connect with you. But as we do, your questions help fuel our content. So head to AtoZrunning.com/questions to submit those and share your thoughts with us, or find any of the places where you connect with our content: YouTube, comments, social medias, and messages there, all that kind of stuff, and just interact.
Yeah,
it's good.
I'll humbly ask for you to rate and subscribe the show. Maybe share it with a friend. We'd love
that's not
grow.
Humble. The show is good.
Hey.
So rate it well, or don't rate it at all.
Zach.
because you're just being mean.
See what I have to put up with. See what I have to put up with. Well, like Zach said, we really do love connecting with you. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Thank you, Lindsay Flanagan, for sharing your experience with running by effort. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.